to everyone present. I think my brother said everything that needed to be said, so maybe I can take my seat now? No? The days of our lives are 80 years and 10. And if by reason of strength there are 80 years, yet is there strength, labor, and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away. But the Bible did not say anything about 50. Well, I want to take it that the 50 was meant for me. The 5th score was meant for me, because those 22 years I had the opportunity to spend a great deal of time with my mother. Amen. A great deal of time sitting down and reflecting over her younger years. And it was through her that I got a better understanding of what the 1920s and 30s and 40s was all about. A lot of time, our younger generation don't know the history of their parents or their grandparents. I had that opportunity, and I feel grateful that she lived those extra 22 years, because I asked a lot of questions during those 22 years. My mother lived through World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the advent of the motor car, the advent of television, and to my surprise, my mother at age 85 told me that she wished she was born a little later, not earlier, later, because she wished she had the opportunity to learn how to drive a car and ultimately learn how to drive a tractor trailer. You see, she was that kind of woman who was not swayed by that which looks difficult. She saw it as a challenge, and she would not step away from challenges. She felt it was her business to complete any task that was given to her to the best of her ability. And even if the gain, the pay, or whatever that comes from that task was small, it didn't matter. As long as she accepted the task, she was going to do it to the best of her ability. We don't find that today in many people. When we go to work, we try to do as little as we can, and we consistently ask the boss for a raise. 102 years is a very long time. And I could stand here tonight and tell you stories after stories which would take another 100 years. So I'm not going to try to do that. I am just going to try to say that, tell you a couple things that I keep in my mind from the number of years and the number of discussions that I've had with my mother. And one of those things that is in my mind is when she said to me one day, when you have a task to do it well, and do it within the allotted time, for tomorrow is not promised to anyone. And behind that, I just have a little anecdote that I want to tell you quickly, and I'll move on. When I was approximately 8 or 9 years old, I don't remember exactly which one, my mother was fervently involved in fundraising to rehabilitate the 150-year-old church that we attended. And there were rallies of all sorts. There were birthday rallies. There were rallies of the flowers. There were rallies of the birds. There were silver tree rallies. And so many rallies till eventually a sanctuary was built. What really happened, the old sanctuary fell into somewhat of a disrepair. And one day when all the members of the church gathered together to do what was called back then free labor for the church, some members who were carpenters removed some of the floorboards from the church with the intention of replacing them that same day. The women from the church gathered at the church to prepare lunch for the men. And when it was time for lunch, they called the men to come outside in the churchyard. The table was set for them to sit down and have lunch. So they came out, they sat down under a grapefruit tree. And just as they said prayer and started to eat, a very calm breeze rustled through the leaves of the grapefruit tree, and the entire sanctuary fell into its foundations. The entire building. Instead of preparing the church, they set out to retrieve timbers from the fallen building and built a shed. And services were held in that shed for the next 12 years, while the rallies were planned to rebuild the sanctuary. As a child, I remember going to service with my mother and my father, and the hymn was announced, or the scripture was announced, and it started to rain. And I had my hymn book in my hand, and I was shifting it from the water that was falling through the roof of the shed, so that it wouldn't fall in my Bible or my hymn book. However, today, there's a brand new sanctuary there. The church that was considered the second church is now the mother church, hosting a parish of 4 other churches. And the senior pastor resides in a manse that was later constructed on the property of this new church. As my brother said earlier, he used to have to go to church with my mother and walk 4 miles. Well, it's actually 8 miles. It's 4 miles to church and 4 miles back. It's 8 miles in a day. And you dare not tell my mother or my father that you were not going, because you are going. And if there is any rebellion about it, you were going to get a whipping on top of it. When I was about 8, my mother, in one of her rallies, gave me a poem to learn and to recite that poem at the rally. That was a rally of poems. And all the other kids had poems that they had to say. And when it was time for rehearsal, I noticed that all these bigger guys who were much bigger and older than I came up and said poems with 2 verses, 3 verses, no more than 4 verses. My poem was 6 verses long. I could not retain all of it. And the day of the rally, I only learned 4 of the 6 verses. And I sat in the service that day panicking all day long. When the service was over, I said to my mother, I only know 4 verses. Will you allow me to just say the 4 verses? She said, you are not speaking to me. She said, I want you to go outside, and I want you to take that piece of paper, and I want you to study the last 2 verses before time for the rally. I went outside and I did my very best, and I think somehow I got the 5th verse. But I just could not remember the beginning sentence of the 6th verse. And I figure I'll go inside and strike a deal with my mother. I said to her, during the rally, why don't you sit in the third pew from the front? And when I go up to say my poem, if you see where I am struggling, just mouth the first two words of the beginning sentence, and I will get it from there. And she said, I will do no such thing. So I went back outside and did my best to study the 6th verse. And it was time for the rally, and she came and get me, and she said, you better get inside, and I need all 6. Well, I got through the first 4. My mother, before the rally started, she went and sat 5 pews in the benches. And she sat in the corner further away from me. And she had a bunch of papers in her hand and put her head in the papers, and she never looked at me. I got through 4 verses, and I took a deep breath and gulped some air and managed to remember the beginning sentence of the 5th verse. And I got through the 5th verse. And when I got to the 6th verse, I paused. And there was a lady sitting right in front of me. She knew me very well. She slid from the back of her pew right to the edge because she was sure I was done. I could not remember anymore. And as I observed her, the words of the 6th verse came to me. And I finished the 6th verse. And I got standing ovation. Today, I don't remember the first 5 verses. I only remember the 6th verse. And I never forget it. Never forget it. The 6th verse says, 3 times I came to your friendly door. 3 times my shadow was on your floor. I was a child with a wrench and a rack. I was a beggar. I was a beggar you gave to eat. And I was a child on the homeless street. The poem would not have made any sense with 4 verses had I not gotten to the 6th verse. When I went home, I asked my mother, how come you gave me 6 verses to remember, and the other kids got 3 and 4? She said, if I give you something to do, I expect you to do it to the best of your ability with the time allotted. How do you expect me to ask the children of other parents to come out and do their lot when I can't get my own to do what I ask them to do? The other thing I got from my mother was treat each other well. For the good you do will follow you, and it will be repaid several times over. The anecdote is this, and I'll be as short as I can on this one. One Sunday evening, my father and mother came home from church, and our next door neighbor knocked on the gate and pushed 2 little children through the gate with a bundle of clothes tied up. He said, I don't know where their father is. He left them at my house. I can't take care of them. You take care of them. The 2 little boys moved into our house. My mother made them comfortable. She went out and she bought fabric and she made them school uniforms. Had them registered in school for the first time in their lives. And they lived with us for well over a year. And one day there was a knock at the gate. Their father showed up. Told my mother, I'm here to collect my boys. The little boy, little of the 2, and his name was actually Little. And his last name, don't laugh, was Mosquito. Little Mosquito was 5 or 6 years old, and he grabbed onto my mother's skirt and he said, Miss Rose, please don't let him take me. I do not want to go. And his father grabbed him, and the little kid cried hard. He said, Miss Rose, please, please don't let him take me. I do not want to go. Well, she had no legal jurisdiction to withhold him. So the little kid was dragged, screaming and crying through the gate. We never saw Sidney Mosquito or Little Mosquito again, but I've never seen them. A few years ago, when my mother was about 85 years old, she told me she would like to go to Jamaica for probably the last time. She went, she came back, she says, I have a story to tell you. I went to the old market, and when I was coming out of the market, she said, a handsome young man walked up to me, called me by my name, said, Miss Rose, can I take your packages for you? And he walked her to a waiting taxi car, opened the door, let her in, handed her her packages. Now, my mother was a lady who never relinquished anything she has in her hand to anybody. But to give it up to this young man, I don't know what had gotten into her. But he reached in his pocket, took out his wallet, and paid the cab driver, and he said, take Miss Rose home to her door. He told Miss Rose, do not pay him anything, I already paid. When he closed the door, she said to him, who are you? What is your name? And he said, I am Little Mosquito. Treat each other right. So the good you do will follow you and repay itself over and over. Forgive those who do evil against you. My mother was a very sickly child, and she lived on a plantation property with her mother and her other siblings. There were many days when she did not get to go to school because she was so sick. And one day, her illness was so great, her mother asked the plantation overseer if he could find it in himself to take her to the doctor. And he told my grandmother, why waste good money on a sickly child who's not going to make it anyway? He never took her to the doctor. My grandmother asked the penner, which was the guy who took care of the cattle on the property, if he could take her to the doctor in a horse-drawn wagon. He had to hide to take her to the doctor. I know the overseer would be ashamed of himself to know that my mother lived to be 102. My mother always tells me, have manners and respect for all you meet. She would even say, manners is due even to a dog. Because if you ill-treat the dog, it will bite you. And she said, manners can take you around the world without a penny in your pocket. I have proven that. I haven't gone around the world, but I have proven how telling the truth and having manners and having respect can open doors for you that you never knew could be open to you. There's a lot more I could tell you, but I'm not going to keep you. I just want to say thanks to a whole host of people who met my mother right here at Trinity, and you have endeared yourself to her. You have treated her with nothing but kindness. And in her last days, my mother was not able to recognize everyone who visited her. Her failing eyesight did not allow her to be able to read all the cards that were sent to her. But I want to say thanks to everyone who offered this, even the smallest amount of kindness to my mother. She was always grateful. And I want to tell you that the staff at the Linden Center, where she spent her last 6 years, I have a great deal of admiration for the staff. They treated her royally. And there was a patient at the nursing home who passed away earlier this year, sometime in July or June or July, who said to me one day in the dining room, "Mr. Forrest, I want to say something to you about your mother." She said, "Since I came here, I had a good reason to observe your mother. And I don't think your mother was put in this nursing home as a patient. I think your mother was put here as a missionary." She had no real illnesses, so to speak. No high blood pressure, no high cholesterol, no heart problems, no real illnesses. Her only problem basically was old age. But she was put here to remind these senior citizens in this nursing home that they didn't wake up in the morning on their own. She was put here to remind them that without the help of the Lord Jesus Christ, many of them would not be there. And she said, "I think that was your mother's mission while she was in this nursing home. It wasn't because she was just a patient. She was sent here by God to finish her work." So to the staff, thanks. To the members of Trinity Baptist Church, all the auxiliaries, everyone who did the smallest little thing for her, I thank you. And there's one young man, I don't know if he's here, Mr. Daniel Austin. I don't know if he's here or not, but if he's not here, Mom, take this message home for Daniel. In these days when everybody seems to think that chivalry is dead, they need to speak to Daniel Austin. My mother was very proud of that young man who on a Sunday morning when I pulled up outside, he would step outside, come to the car door, open the door for her, take her pocketbook, help her out of the car, walk her to her seat, and sat her down. Nobody asked him to do it. He did it on his own. My mother loved him to death. Chivalry is not dead. It's dead in the minds of those who want to kill it. On October 15, 2014, at approximately 7:30 a.m., Rose Hilda Forrest took her last breath. mother was also the choir director of the Orange Park Baptist Church. And when she came to Trinity, she met Brother Dennis Nelson. And she was very proud of him. She was very pleased with his playing. And she never forget Brother Dennis Nelson. When he was at the piano or at the organ, she was in church.